Hi, Stephen. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, it's been quite a couple weeks, historic really, living through it and it's been interesting just seeing the tectonic shifts, in markets and global dynamics and politics. I mean, it's not often you can truly say that you're living through history, but we truly are right now. And honestly, it's given me a lot of thoughts on not just what's happening, but almost like the meta context of how people navigate situations where there is a lot happening or there is like uncertainty. And that's been one of the interesting parts for me in all of this is like watching people try to model and make sense of something which is both profoundly impactful and also profoundly uncertain. None of us have clear information. So, I mean, that's a whole topic, but like that has been one of the most interesting parts to me about the last couple weeks.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I mean, it kind of started. I mean, if we zoom out, this epoch overall has been completely crazy with we breaking 100K, the ETFs coming into fruition. I mean, it was a little bit before we started the epoch. Then strategic Bitcoin reserve, Trump is elected. Now we seemingly have a trade war with China and America going on. What's kind of one of your highlights? What is kind of standing out for you in this times?
One of the things, in many ways, so much that is happening is a profound um, confirmation for so many of the Bitcoin views, worldviews, right? Specifically, what I mean is it was only after I got exposed to Bitcoin that I really heard people talking about putting a lot of attention into like Triffin's dilemma and the dynamic of the US dollar monetary system and the impacts that this had on America and on the globe. And that this monetary order was a driving force in what I would call the transition of the US economy and the US political economy from the kind of golden era of the 1950s to 1970s to what we're experiencing today. And in America, and I know you're in Europe, but in America, there's a lot of discontent and dissatisfaction on the difference between what the shape of the economy today versus the shape of the economy in the 1950s. And this is something which, unless you really look underneath the surface or you're living here directly experiencing it, it's not immediately visible when you look at top line GDP growth, top line wealth growth, top line equities markets growth, right? There's this one view from the top using all the financial metrics where it's like the US is the richest, best, most successful country in the world. And that is a true statement on those levels. But it has had a hidden underbelly where there's been a huge divergence. People have called it a K-shape economy, where so much of that kind of effectively concentrates in the financial class and the top. And I'm by no means someone that's like, wealth inequality is normal, it's natural, it is innate outflowing of divergences in human capacity and many other factors. There's no world where you don't have it. But there are ways that systems can artificially reinforce it via just purely monetary dynamics. And that's what we've seen. We've seen this K-shaped economy where people whose careers or assets position them in such a way where they benefit from the global monetary standard have done very well. And the costs of that system have been increasingly borne by just normal workers and people who, if you compare the like kind of real quality of life of the normal American worker. Can they afford a home? Can they afford a family, college, healthcare? These things are progressively less attainable. They're progressively more expensive relative to their earning capacity. And this is kind of this divergence that when people here are talking about this K-shaped economy, or they're talking about the changes in the US post the 50s to 70s period, really like post the Nixon shock, the gold window closing, like this is what they're highlighting. And that was a roundabout way of saying this is something Bitcoiners were really vocal and focused on, and was something I had never really encountered until I got into Bitcoin. And so it's fascinating to see this take center stage in this administration. This is very much the language that Trump, that Bessent, that this whole administration, Stephen Moran, are using to say, hey, we want to take a stab at correcting this. And this is something, Bitcoiners have been like, well, it's a Triffin's dilemma problem. It's a US dollar as world reserve currency problem. It's inevitable as long as the dollar serves this very specific role. And so if you had a neutral reserve asset like Bitcoin, as we once did with gold, some of these dynamics would start to reverse. And, it's a fraught conversation with, many details and nuance. But what comes up for me most watching everything that's happening is the astonishing way that a seemingly niche and countercultural concern has taken center stage.
Interesting. I just want to. There's a lot. There's a lot of interesting things in there. First of all, I think many are aware. Many might not be aware. What is the Triffin's dilemma?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's basically the word for kind of an economic problem that a man, I believe Robert Triffin, but his last name was Triffin, he presented it to the US and Congress in like the 60s or 70s. Must have been the 70s because it must have been post-Nixon. And it's basically saying that the issuer of the world reserve currency, right? So if we issue the dollar, and the dollar is like the currency, right? It's used to settle trade. It's used to store value, and or treasury bonds are. It is kind of the primary main currency that so many things are linked to. The only entity that can produce the dollar is the US, right? So 100% of the globe's, every other country's demand for dollars must be supplied by the US because no one else can make them, right? It's pretty simple. So however much dollars Japan wants, China wants, India wants, Europe wants, everyone wants, we have to produce. Well, how do we produce them? We print them. We deficit spend them into existence. And so we must continually issue debt and issue currency to meet the demand of the globe. And so this mandates that we run continual deficits. We're running continual deficits. We are going more and more and more and more into debt. And we're also running trade deficits. People talk about how the US is a twin deficit nation. So we're running monetary deficits, we're running trade deficits. So what Triffin's dilemma is it's saying this dynamic, being this twin deficit nation, has a cost. It has a price that we really can't escape as long as we shoulder the mantle of meeting this global demand for dollars, US dollar assets, US debt. And the cost that we pay is many things, but you can think of it most of all that like the brunt of that, those deficits, right? It's borne by not top tier financiers who can extract rents from global bond flows or who own assets that global capital surpluses get redirected in, right? So what happens is like the dollars go out, the debt goes out, and then a lot of that comes back to buy tech stocks, and a lot of that comes back to buy US dollar denominated assets. So if you either are in the financial industry where you extract basis points from global bond trades and debt issuance and these various things, or you're in the tech industry and you get venture investing, those dollars just come to you to invest in your companies because they're the best performing companies in the world. If you're in one of those two industries, you've done great. Like I've always said, there's two. There's tech and finance, and there's everything else in America. And if you don't work in tech and finance, you're kind of in. There's only really a service sector economy, and this is what I think people don't fully understand. Is in America, I think, especially outside of America, it's just a vast service sector economy, retail, fast food, so many contractors, home repair, consumption, goods, yachts. I mean, that's being obviously, car sales, boat sales, machine, recreational things. It's this vast service sector economy. And those jobs aren't very good. They're really not. And so with Triffin's dilemma, you either position yourself to extract wealth from this dynamic, which tech and finance are positioned in that way, or you effectively you subsidize our satisfying of global demand. So the US is satisfying global demand for dollar and dollar assets, and the price of that is being paid by America's own middle class and citizens. And so there comes a certain point where people start asking, like, why are we sacrificing our kind of core middle base? Why are we making our citizens bear all the burdens of this system to satisfy the globe's demand for this currency and asset? And that's what's being navigated in America right now that's driving a lot of this. And that doesn't mean that the policies are perfect. I actually think the tariffs were way over calibrated. I think if they stay the way they are, it'll be really bad. Now, there's a whole other conversation of were they ever intended to stay that way? Yes, they've said that. No, that might not be true. But it's not saying that the approach has been perhaps the approach I would take, but this is the question.
How is actually the reaction from American citizens and your friends from your environment to those tariffs? I heard for the first time in this administration bigger critical things about what Trump is doing. I think Elon Musk was vocal about that he's actually kind of a proponent for zero tariffs. There was some Bill Ackman.
Yeah.
Is it Bill Ackman?
Yes.
I'm not sure, but I think he was also vocal about it. So how do you see how is the reaction from America and what you're seeing to those tariffs and what's going on?
Yeah. Let me answer that question, and then I want to circle back on one other point on the last thing about why this has to do with manufacturing capacity and industrial capacity. I want to come back to that, but so people that own assets in America right now have been pretty unhappy, right? The Trump administration has, I think, really pissed off the business class, asset owners. Elon Musk is unhappy because fundamentally he's an entrepreneur. And he understands that these policies will be pretty kind of devastating in their current form. And so, people that own assets are not having a good time. And, not that I'm some uber wealthy billionaire or anything, but even my own life, it's been a hit, and it has a kind of gut. There's a kind of a gut punch. It's harder to handle when you're personally kind of bearing the costs every day. And so it's been difficult, I think, for just anybody that has a material amount of their net worth stored in financial assets, which is pretty much anybody with any financial assets in the US. However, the thing to understand, so many Americans do not own any assets, and they do not care. So there is this remarkable dynamic where there's so many Americans, many of them Trump voters, who just do not have money in the stock market. They do not have assets. And so, frankly, they don't really care if the market goes down. Now, this is misguided because in such a financialized economy such as the US, you can't have that sort, like the whole system comes off the wheels if you have a prolonged stock market crash. So there's a very real way that you really can't have it. It'll be disastrous. But the people that don't own assets don't understand that. And I think there's resentment. And I think there's this kind of view that's like, we wanted the system to change. We wanted the system to change. I don't care if the market crashes. I don't have, they're saying that they don't have assets. They don't have opportunities. They've been locked out of upward social mobility for decades. And like, this is what they wanted. And so, I think so many of the people talking about like, oh, the Trump faction is politically screwed because this will be so unpopular. They're really betraying their own class status and their own financial status as like an asset owner, as somebody that probably has, 6, 7+ figures in financial assets whose life is really being impacted by this. And they're assuming that everyone else is like them. The thing is they're not. Very few Americans have large allocations to stocks outside the top 10% of earners. But the confounding thing there is that the spending patterns and the tax payments of the top 10% of earners are incredibly critical to the US functioning. So I think, people in that top 10% are very unhappy in America right now with all that's happened. Most people don't care. And I'd actually really be curious, like you're in Europe, I'm obviously in America. How is this being received? Like, the median person there, what do other people like? What's the average opinion? And then is there anybody outside of that average opinion you've come across?
There's obviously what the mainstream media is saying and what the officials are saying, and then there is what people on the street say. And I think my environment, my subjective small environment, really doesn't care right now. But they're saying like, oh, like he's having a trade war. Like there are people that like Trump, and there are people that don't like Trump. The people that don't like Trump really don't care about the tariffs right now, and the people that don't like him, they are more like, oh, like he's driving down the economy, which is a weird thing to say. Like, how can the U.S. president drive down the European economy? Yes, there's some influence and some connections there, but if he makes tariffs and this is hurting the European economy, then the European economy is not strong enough, in my opinion, because if he puts too many restrictions on America and the trade zone, and European economy would be strong enough, then it would hurt America more than it would hurt Europe. That's just like my layman's terms understanding of it. Then, then it's super interesting what the kind of media and the officials are saying. They are trying to not overdo it. So they are not trying to, because I think China really went in and really said like the hammer, like, hey, let's push back. Europe is a little bit more subtle and tries to keep an open ear and an open dialogue, and just make small changes, which I think come in effect tomorrow, which will be already like 1-2 weeks when this podcast will come out. So it will be really fun to see how it shakes up. I personally not that interested right now with tariffs. I mean, I don't have a company that says something like, for example, I heard Apple is really in a really bad spot really because bad. They are manufacturing a lot in China, and it's easy to say like then just make the factories in America, but that's a process.
It's a process.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast, and if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.